There will never be another Knocked Loose, and in this video I want to go over why I believe that is, and why I think we are witnessing a band that only comes around every decade or so to really redefine and recontextualize how we approach our view of metal mainstream, as well as how metal can operate in a mainstream light, appeal to mainstream audiences, and pierce out of the confinements of the little box that so many non-metal listeners and non-punk listeners love to confine metal into, breaching those boundaries and define expectations in a way that very few bands are capable of doing. All while maintaining this sort of torch bearing for hardcore punk, specifically the New England scene, where these guys aren't even from, and showcasing that even in your own extremity and intensity, you don't have to compromise or sacrifice where you come from, what you enjoy playing, or what roots you have to get a bigger audience and to reach bigger demographics. I really wanted to come on here and talk a little bit about the importance of the brand new Knocked Loose record, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To. I've went in depth before about my opinions of Knocked Loose and why I think they're one of the most important things to happen to metal in the past decade or two, and I really think that is even more so exemplified with this new record, as well as the reception it's getting from not only listeners but reviewers and mainstream publications. Ever since Knocked Loose played Coachella, and you could clearly see that the crowd was bumping it to the fucking ninth dimension, even though typically the people that go there are there for hip-hop and pop and that sort of thing and electronic music. It was incredible to see such a reception to that music, and I've always said that every couple of decades there are some metal bands that bleed through into the mainstream, into people's ears that would not typically hear it. You've seen it with Metallica and Pantera, in modern memory bands like Spiritbox and Bad Omens, but considering that bands like Sleep Token, Bad Omens, Spiritbox got that way because mostly TikTok and the Gen Z movement pushing it on YouTube Shorts and TikTok, there really isn't a lot of evidence as to why Knocked Loose was able to get to this point, and I continue to say that they are literally a fucking case study. Obviously, Laugh Tracks and A Different Shade of Blue were fantastic records in their own right and were garnering a lot of acclaim in the underground and bled into the metal mainstream a little bit. It wasn't until they released A Tear in the Fabric of Life, the EP, that they just shot up in such a way to become this widespread phenomenon, not only in the metal sphere but the punk sphere and the mainstream sphere. So they bound these three communities together and got a ton of people into hardcore punk and metalcore, and bridged the gap between a lot of core kids and beat down hardcore and hardcore punk kids. And with the recent review that Anthony Fantano did of them, which I won't spoil, but it was overwhelmingly positive and is garnering a ton of publicity for the band even more so, as well as pretty much every review you're seeing from every publication ever, it's not hard to see why people are getting turned on to this music, but just because they're getting turned on to it does not mean that they have to like it in the end. So why is Knocked Loose connecting to so many young and old listeners, both metal, punk, and otherwise? Because usually if you see a band blow up to this degree, the bands that I mentioned earlier, bands like Metallica, bands like Pantera, a band like Nirvana, even though they weren't really metal in quotes, as well as like the 2000s new metal movement and alt metal movements with bands like Linkin Park, System of a Down, you'll kind of see a little bit of a change in their style. They will sort of dilute themselves a little bit or become a little bit more commercially viable. You saw Metallica do that, you saw Linkin Park do that, and pretty much the only band that didn't really have to do that was System of a Down. And funnily enough, I can see a lot of comparison in System of a Down and Knocked Loose popularity, even if it's not something to do with like their music itself or their messaging or anything, of course. But if you really look at how they went against the grain of what is expected from popular metal and didn't even change their style but doubled down on their intensity and ferocity, I think you could really draw that comparison well. And that's the thing about Knocked Loose. They have answered their popularity by becoming even more compressed, even heavier, even more melodically dense, even more atmospheric, even more experimental, being willing to take their music out of just the cookie cutter metalcore roots that it came from and inject more of that hardcore punk veneer into their music, to where it is just laden with all of these different influences coming from punk and screamo and metalcore, all into this ball that is heavier, more intense, more just unrelenting. And this relentless style of metal is something you really don't see break into the mainstream in this way. I can't can't really recall that many hardcore punk bands that were able and capable of getting to this degree of popularity in the mainstream and metal eye. And I think a lot of that just comes down to doing something that eventually just breaches through, no matter how heavy or soft it is. When you have such an infectious style or something that people are not used to, eventually that is going to reach the audience and demographics you want to, sure, but that's not going to account for all the people that could get into your music. And Knocked Loose is scratching a certain itch of abnormality and something that is off the beaten path, and because it's getting more popular, it's that momentum and snowball effect that is bringing more and more people into the fold. And that's another thing about Knocked Loose, is you can't really say that they're pussying out or they're changing their style or that they're sellouts. They are becoming more heavy throughout their timeline more and more with every single release that they come out with. Their production is getting more layered, their vocals are getting more complex, their compositions are getting more brutal. And the one thing that I really hope this teaches a lot of metalcore bands that are up and coming or being inspired by Knocked Loose is, I really, in my heart of hearts, hope that it shows people that if you go out of your comfort zone, you don't have to make music that is the most appealing or the most commercially viable, and it doesn't have to be octane core. You can go out of your comfort zone and be heavy as possible, but if you have the talent and the songwriting and the vigor to back yourself up, if you are able to find your correct audience, it is going to take you into more fame than you could ever imagine. And obviously, not every metal band is going to get to the point that Knocked Loose is, but it shows that, like the video I made recently about metalcore breakdowns, you don't have to just base your entire composition around a breakdown or the shocking factor, because that does fizzle out, that does end up ending eventually, and Knocked Loose has answered this by making incredible breakdowns that also mix with their fantastic songwriting, with Brian Garris being a really unique vocalist. And that's another thing. I think Brian Garris as a vocalist is a big reason that this got to the point that it did. He really is unique. He has that chipmunk, instantly identifiable, really high-pitched shriek sort of scream style that maybe you do hear from some other bands, but not to this degree. And once again, when you have a unique vocalist, it is really awesome, because for every, like, you know, guttural, grunterial, growling dude in cargo shorts and a tank top, there is a Brian Garris out there that is sort of revolutionizing the popularity of metal by doing this. And is he the first to perform this style? Hardly, but he's taking it from a lot of screamo and a lot of hardcore punk and bringing it into a metalcore sort of thing. And metalcore always kind of had its place at the table when you got like the screamo movement, when you got the metalcore movement of like As I Lay Dying and Killswitch Engage, and then later the scene emo and screamo and metalcore sort of stuff. So metalcore has always sort of had this air of viability and the commercial aspect before, so it's not necessarily the newest thing on the block. But when you have other metalcore bands that are a lot more accessible, like Spirit Box and Bad Omens and Sleep Token, it really is cool to see sort of this outlier, this black sheep, this pariah of sorts in Knocked Loose. And honestly, it kind of is a big fuck you and just a huge middle finger to everyone who says that metal does not have a spot at the dinner table, and especially extreme metal of any variety doesn't have the sort of appeal that other genres do. And that is true. You're not going to see tens of millions of listens or plays or buys of an album, but there is something to be said about the clamoring for such despondent productions, such crushing compositions, and being able to still come out of that on the other side, maintaining your roots to the scene that you fucking came from, paying homage to everything that came before you, paying tradition and homage to the New England scene and all of the bands of the 90s and 2000s, the insanely heavy metalcore and hardcore punk bands that laid the foundation so that bands like Knocked Loose could not only catch their stride, but thrive in their own department. Would I go so far as to say that Knocked Loose has gone forward and made something out of metalcore and hardcore punk that is not going to be able to be replicated anytime soon, and it's taking the genre to new heights in a way that is extremely rare and should be not only sought after but studied? Abso-fucking-lutely. There will always be a place in the musical landscape for bands that are willing to push the envelope and really experiment with what you can do with sound, whether it be very heavy or very soft. And no matter what sort of extreme spectrum you are on or where you lie on the spectrum, there is always going to be a place for you to be able to find an audience that that best suits you and also reach so many people and provide that gateway. And that's exactly what Knocked Loose are doing. They are providing a gateway. They are bridging the gap, and they are birthing so many hardcore punk kids and metalcore kids. And that's not even getting into the demographics of older punk and metalcore fans that love beatdown and love crowd killing and jumping off stages and spin dive kicking people through the air and the camaraderie of a punk landscape, that are finally getting re-energized and re-interested in this type of music, that have just been loving the old classics because there really haven't been many bands that have successfully brought this into the modern sphere in such a way that doesn't compromise any of the intelligence, any of the rawness, any of the primality of the music itself. So many people saying that they are finally excited for hardcore punk again, that they are finally excited for the scene and all of the things that come with it. And that's not even getting into the fact that Knocked Loose fan base are really chill. They're some of the coolest people on the scene right now, and I've not really had an interaction with a diehard Knocked Loose fan that hasn't been really chill. And you can tell that it's just a bunch of fun-loving people that are so down with the atmosphere, with the culture, with the community, and there is just this mutual respect and understanding between everyone. But why exactly do you think Knocked Loose are getting to this point? You can let me know down in the comment section below. I would love to hear it, your opinions on them, if you like them, if you don't, why you thought they got as popular as they did. You can leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.